When Philadelphia police officers arrived at the abandoned Ada H. Lewis Middle School grounds on October 18, 2025, they followed a chilling anonymous tip that would haunt them forever. Go back. She's there. Look again. Behind the crumbling brick building, hidden among the overgrown woods of East Germantown, they found what 14 days of desperate searching had failed to reveal: a shallow grave. Inside lay the remains of 23-year-old Kada Scott, her phone case and glasses scattered nearby like forgotten relics of a life violently stolen. But this wasn't a random tragedy. This wasn't an unpredictable act of violence. Kada Scott's murder was a crescendo of a pattern that everyone could see but no one stopped, until it was too late. But before we uncover how a brief workplace acquaintance became a death sentence, ask yourself this: in an age where we text strangers, swipe right on profiles, and share our locations with people we barely know, how do we distinguish between connection and danger? If this story makes you question every unanswered call, every persistent message, every dropped charge that could have saved a life, make sure you're subscribed to Crazy Crime Reels, because we don't just tell crime stories, we uncover the truth that could save lives. Now, let's discover how Kada Scott's bright future was extinguished by a predator the system had already caught and let go. Before Kada Scott ever received that first text message, "Yo, Kada, this is my new number," Keon King had already perfected his pattern. At just 21 years old, this unemployed man from Dover, Delaware, had transformed social media into his hunting ground and Philadelphia streets into his territory. King wasn't a stranger to violence against women. He was a serial abuser whose escalating crimes were documented, reported, and then catastrophically dismissed. Born and raised in Delaware, King maintained no stable employment, no apparent ambitions beyond the immediate gratification of control. What he did maintain was a pattern so clear, so documented, that his later action should have surprised absolutely no one. His weapon of choice? Intimidation wrapped in casual communication. His victims? Young women, accessible, trusting, vulnerable in their isolation. His stage? Social media platforms where he didn't just commit crimes, he performed them for an audience. In January 2025, 10 months before Kada's murder, King did something that should have sealed his fate. He documented his own crime. Videos posted to TikTok and Instagram showed him attempting to break into his ex-girlfriend's home in Philadelphia. The footage captured his determination, his sense of entitlement, his complete lack of fear of consequences. And why should he fear? The videos remained online, evidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. What the videos didn't show was what happened next. King forced his ex-girlfriend into a vehicle. He assaulted her. He strangled her, his hands around her throat, cutting off her hair, demonstrating the ultimate control, the power to let her breathe or not. Then, when he was satisfied, he released her. She survived. She reported the crime. Charges were filed: kidnapping, assault, strangulation. And then those charges were dropped. Why? Because his victim was too terrified to appear in court. Mark Geragos, a renowned criminal defense attorney with decades of experience in high-profile cases, would later observe a chilling truth about cases like this. There are certain people in society who are predatory and will prey on innocent people. King was precisely that, a predator whose hunting ground was expanding and whose confidence was growing with every woman he terrified into silence. King's pattern was devastatingly simple. Target selection were young women, often between 20 and 25, working accessible jobs, living alone or in situations where they could be isolated. Professional women building careers, trusting enough to respond to messages, vulnerable enough to be overwhelmed by his persistence. Initial contact came about through casual texts, seemingly innocent workplace interactions. The digital equivalent of a friendly smile, disarming, non-threatening, easy to dismiss as harmless flirtation. The escalation began when casual interest didn't yield control. The harassment began. Repeated calls. Messages that shifted from friendly to insistent to threatening. The transformation from shooter to stalker happened so gradually that victims often didn't recognize a danger until they were drowning in it. Violence kicked in when fear wasn't enough. King escalated to physical force. Vehicles became his tool of choice. Mobile crime scenes where he could isolate victims, control their movement, and assault them away from potential help. Strangulation revealed his psychology, the need to demonstrate power over life itself. And the aftermath is what made King particularly dangerous. he felt no remorse. After the January assault, he didn't hide. He posted videos. He moved freely between Delaware and Philadelphia. He continued targeting women. The failed prosecution hadn't taught him fear of consequences. It had taught him he was immune to them. King's world existed at the intersection of multiple failures. He possessed illegal firearms despite being under scrutiny. He stole vehicles with apparent ease, like the black Hyundai Accent he would later use in Kada's murder, taken just one day before her death. He operated in a city where restraining orders existed on paper but offered little real protection, where dropped charges meant predators returned to hunting. His social media presence wasn't just documentation, it was validation. Each video that stayed online, each charge that disappeared, each victim too scared to testify told King the same message. You can do this. They can't stop you. Keep going. By October 2025, the red flags surrounding Keon King weren't just visible. They were screaming. Number 1. He had documented violence against an intimate partner, including strangulation, the single most significant predictor of future homicide in domestic violence cases. Red flag 2. Victim was too terrified to testify, indicating a level of fear that suggested ongoing threat and psychological control. Red flag 3. Social media documentation of crimes, showing not just lack of remorse but pride in violence, a need to perform predation for an audience. Red flag number 4. Pattern of targeting multiple women, with prosecutors noting additional victims coming forward, evidence of serial behavior, not isolated incidents. Red flag number 5. Illegal firearm possession and vehicle theft, showing escalation in criminal sophistication and resources. This is a haunting question that would torment Philadelphia's justice system. What if the January charges had stuck? What if his ex-girlfriend had felt safe enough to testify? What if the videos posted online had been used as evidence when she couldn't face him in court? Experts in domestic violence know the answer. Strangulation is a point of no return. When an abuser's hands close around a victim's throat, when they feel that power and cross that line, they almost never stop there. The only question is how much further they'll go and how many victims will fall before someone stops them. Keon King was stopped exactly once, by his ex-girlfriend's survival and her courage in reporting. The system caught him, had him in custody, had charges filed, had evidence, and then the system let him go, releasing him back into the population of vulnerable women like a shark returned to feeding grounds. What drove Keon King wasn't passion or love twisted into violence. It was something colder, more calculated. He was a man for whom women existed as objects to be acquired, controlled, and displayed, whether through relationships, through violence, or through social media posts documenting both. His crimes weren't crimes of opportunity or impulse. They were expressions of a worldview where his desires superseded others' rights, where resistance deserved punishment, where saying no justified violence. The strangulation in January wasn't an attempt to kill, it was a demonstration. I can kill you if I want to. I'm choosing not to. Now do what I say. That philosophy, that bone-deep belief in his right to control, would metastasize into murder, not because something went wrong, not because he lost control, but because control itself was never enough. The ultimate control, the power to end a life, was always a destination. And in January 2025, when charges were dropped, when his ex-girlfriend's fear prevented testimony, when the videos stayed online and King walked free, he learned a crucial lesson. Control works. Violence works. The system will not protect them. And you can do it again. Kada Scott would pay the price for that education. Before October 4th, 2025, before the text, before the abduction, before the grave, Keon King had already destroyed lives. Understanding what he did to others isn't just about documenting a pattern. It's about recognizing the escalation that made Kada's murder not just predictable, but preventable. She was young, professional, living her life in Philadelphia when Keon King decided she belonged to him. Their relationship, once romantic, then toxic, finally terrifying, followed a trajectory that domestic violence experts recognize immediately: isolation, control, violence, terror. The TikTok video begins with an exterior shot, a Philadelphia home, modest, the kind of place where someone should feel safe. Then Keon King appears on camera, approaching the door with purposeful strides. He's not sneaking. He's performing. showing the world what happens when someone tries to leave him. The video shows him attempting to break into her home. What it doesn't show, what happened after the camera stopped recording, or perhaps in footage he chose not to share, was the escalation. He gained access or intercepted her outside. What followed was a kidnapping. She was forced into a vehicle, King's preferred mobile crime scene, the place where he could isolate victims from help. Inside that car, he assaulted her. His hands found her throat. Strangulation in domestic violence is intimate in the worst possible way. It requires sustained physical contact. The victim's face inches away as consciousness fades. It's personal. It's power. It's a promise. I could kill you right now. But he didn't. Not then. After he'd made his point, demonstrated his dominance, felt her struggle weaken, he let her go, released her like a catch-and-release fishing program, but one that left psychological scars as real as the physical bruises around her throat. She did everything right. She reported the crime immediately. The evidence was overwhelming. The videos King himself had posted, showing premeditation and intent. Charges were filed: kidnapping, assault, strangulation, false imprisonment. These weren't minor charges. These were serious felonies that should have put King behind bars for years. The Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, led by Larry Krasner, prosecuted the case. A court date was set. King was held accountable, in theory, but theory and reality diverged at the courtroom door. When the day came for her to testify, to face the man who had strangled her, to relive the terror in front of strangers, she couldn't do it. Prosecutors would later describe her as simply too scared to appear. And without her testimony, the case collapsed. Charges were withdrawn. Understanding her fear isn't difficult. King had already shown her he could find her, break into her home, overpower her, and decide whether she lived or died. He'd posted videos online of himself targeting her, permanent public documentation of his pursuit. If she testified and he walked free, what would he do next? If she testified and he was convicted, what would his associates do? The fear wasn't irrational. The fear was survival instinct. But King didn't see fear. He saw confirmation. He saw weakness in the system. He saw victory. Pennsylvania law, like laws in many states, struggles with a paradox in domestic violence cases. The victims most in need of protection are often the ones least able to participate in prosecution. They are too scared, too traumatized, too isolated, or too controlled by their abusers to testify. The dropped charges in January weren't unusual. They were tragically common. But common doesn't mean acceptable, and in King's case, those dropped charges had specific, measurable consequences. Dr. Jacqueline Campbell, a Johns Hopkins researcher and expert on domestic violence lethality, has studied the predictors of intimate partner homicide for decades. Her research consistently identifies strangulation as a single strongest risk factor, increasing the odds of eventual murder by 750%. Not 75%. 750%. When King's hands closed around his ex-girlfriend's throat in January, he didn't just assault her. He announced his future. He told anyone paying attention that he was capable of murder and comfortable crossing that line. The only variable was time and opportunity. The pattern his crimes revealed was clinical in its clarity. Phase 1. Establishment of control. Initial relationship or contact, where King presented as charming, interested, normal. This phase established connection and trust. Phase 2. Isolation. Cutting victims off from support systems, demanding constant attention, making them feel responsible for his emotions and reactions. Phase 3. Escalating aggression. When victims asserted independence or tried to leave, King escalated from verbal abuse to threats to physical violence. The January assault fell here. Phase 4. Potentially lethal violence. Strangulation represented crossing into life-threatening force. This is where most domestic violence intervention aims to stop the pattern, because what comes after is often murder. Phase 5. Homicide. When control through fear and violence no longer satisfies, when the victim cannot be adequately dominated through assault, when the abuser's psychology demands ultimate power, they kill. King moved through these phases with textbook precision. The January assault was Phase 4. Kada Scott would become Phase 5. The unnamed ex-girlfriend wasn't alone. Following Kada's murder, prosecutors noted that additional women were coming forward with reports of harassment and assault. The details remain protected in ongoing investigations, but the pattern was clear. King had multiple targets, multiple victims at various stages of his escalation pattern. Each woman represented a data point in a pattern everyone should have recognized. Each report was a warning sign. Each dropped charge or complaint filed and then withdrawn was a missed opportunity. Assistant District Attorney Ashley Toxilowski, handling the prosecution after Kada's murder, characterized it plainly: pattern of behavior. Two words that contain volumes: a pattern of targeting women, a pattern of escalating violence, a pattern of using fear to silence victims, a pattern the system documented but failed to stop. By October 2025, multiple systems had encountered Keon King and identified him as dangerous. The criminal justice system, arrested and charged in January, identified as a violent offender, then released when prosecution failed. Social media platforms such as TikTok and Instagram hosted videos of King's crimes, permanent evidence available to anyone, including law enforcement, who looked. Multiple women reporting harassment, multiple warnings to friends and family about a dangerous man targeting women. His ex-girlfriend, alive but living with the knowledge that her abuser walked free, that her fear prevented justice, that he remained a threat to her and others. Every system that touched Keon King's case recognized the danger. None successfully contained it. Understanding why King remained free requires examining systemic failures at multiple levels. Victim testimony requirements. The criminal justice system's heavy reliance on victim testimony in domestic violence cases creates a paradox. The most dangerous abusers are precisely the ones whose victims are too terrified to testify against them. Drop charge consequences. When serious charges are withdrawn, the perpetrator learns impunity. King didn't interpret drop charges as mercy or a second chance. He interpreted them as confirmation that he could continue. Social media evidence gaps. Despite video documentation of crimes, prosecutors struggled to use as evidence without victim cooperation. King's own posted content, clear evidence of premeditation and commission, remained online as he continued targeting women. Resource limitations. Philadelphia's criminal justice system, like many urban systems, was overwhelmed. Prosecutors faced crushing caseloads. Police juggled countless investigations. Support systems for victims were underfunded and overwhelmed. In this environment, one drop charge seemed like triage, not tragedy. Between January and October 2025, something shifted in Keon King. Whether it was confidence from avoiding consequences, frustration at his ex-girlfriend's escape, or simply the inevitable progression of his pathology, his pattern accelerated. He acquired illegal firearms, violating Pennsylvania's Uniform Firearms Act. He began stealing vehicles, showing increased criminal sophistication. He expanded his targeting, moving from ex-partners to new acquaintances. And somewhere in those months, his psychology crossed a threshold. Assault and strangulation no longer satisfied his need for control. He was ready for the ultimate power, the power to take a life and get away with it. Kada Scott entered King's orbit in the worst possible way, at the worst possible time. She was exactly his type, young, professional, working long hours in an isolated setting, accessible through casual workplace interaction. She represented a fresh target, someone without the history and fear that made his ex-girlfriend flee, someone he could approach without raising immediate alarms. When King sent Kada that first text in October, "Yo, Kada, this my new number," he was already rehearsed. He knew how to gain trust through casual communication. He knew how to escalate. He knew how to isolate. And he knew, with absolute certainty from experience, that the system would not stop him in time. The pattern was complete. The predator was prepared. And Kada Scott, vibrant, joyful, with a whole nursing career ahead of her, had no idea that the man texting her had already perfected the pattern that would end her life. Before we discuss how she died, we must understand how she lived. Because Kada Scott was never just a victim. She was a daughter who made her parents proud, a sister her younger sibling looked up to, a friend whose smile was described as genuinely contagious, and a recent Penn State graduate with a nursing career just beginning to bloom. At 23, Kada Scott embodied the kind of determination that transforms dreams into reality. Her graduation from Penn State in 2024 was more than an academic achievement. It was a foundation of her ambition to serve others through nursing. She'd chosen one of the most demanding, underpaid, and essential professions, motivated not by wealth or prestige, but by a genuine desire to care for people in their most vulnerable moments. Her family, deeply rooted in Philadelphia, described her as their joy. She was the kind of person who called her parents regularly, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to share her life with them. Her younger sister, still in high school and working toward her own college dreams, saw Kada not just as family, but as proof that those dreams were achievable. Friends painted a picture of someone whose presence brightened rooms. Her joy wasn't performative or forced. It was authentic, rooted in genuine happiness with her life and hope for her future. She had that rare quality of making people feel seen and valued. The kind of person you text when something good happens because you know she'll celebrate with you. Kada worked as a nursing assistant at the Terrace at Chestnut Hill, an assisted living facility on Belmar Terrace in Philadelphia's Germantown neighborhood. The job was demanding, long hours caring for elderly residents, helping with daily tasks, providing companionship to people often forgotten by families and society. She typically worked night shifts, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., a schedule that isolated her from the normal rhythm of life but allowed her to gain crucial experience in patient care. Her typical day looked like this: wake in the afternoon, spend evenings with friends or family, head to work around 9 p.m., care for residents through the long night hours, return home at dawn, sleep through the morning. It was a schedule of someone building a career from the ground up, paying her dues, learning her profession through hands-on work with people who needed her. In her free time, Kada maintained close friendships. October 4 began as one of those precious evening hours, time with friends before her shift, laughing, talking, enjoying the kind of casual companionship that makes life rich. She had no way of knowing those would be her last hours of normal life. Kada's life in October 2025 was one of transition and growth. She'd recently graduated, secured employment in her chosen field, and was building toward a full nursing career. Her family was proud. Her future was bright. She had that precious thing so many young people chase, momentum toward a better future. But there was a shadow growing at the edges of her life, one that would later horrify everyone who loved her. Kada had been receiving harassing phone calls. Her family knew. Her friends knew. The calls were persistent, unwanted, increasingly aggressive. She'd reported them to loved ones with growing concern. The source of those calls was Keon King. Kada and King's initial contact appeared innocuous, a workplace interaction, possibly when King visited the assisted living facility where Kada worked. The specifics of their first meeting remain unclear, but what's documented is a beginning of text message communication. On October 2nd, 2025, King sent Kada a text: "Yo, Kada, this my new number." Simple, casual, the kind of message that could mean anything. Perhaps Kada had mentioned in passing that she'd like to stay in touch. Perhaps King had presented himself as friendly, harmless, someone worth knowing. Perhaps she simply responded out of politeness. What started as seemingly innocent texting quickly evolved into something darker. King began calling, repeatedly, persistently. The calls that Kada reported to her family as harassment. The calls that made her uncomfortable but not yet terrified. The calls she probably hoped would stop if she just didn't respond. But King's pattern didn't include stopping. It included escalation. This wasn't a relationship. It was a hunter identifying prey. Kada represented everything that fit King's victim profile. At 23, she was young, early in her career, still building the life experience that teaches caution. Accessibility. Working night shifts at a facility he could access, her work schedule was documented, her presence predictable. Isolation. Night shifts meant fewer co-workers, less supervision, arriving and leaving in darkness. Professional courtesy. As someone in a caring profession, Kada was likely trained to be kind, helpful, to see the good in people, qualities predators exploit. Trust. Without the history of abuse that terrified his ex-girlfriend, Kada had no immediate reason to recognize King as lethal. There was no genuine connection here, no relationship of equals. There was a young woman trying to navigate a situation she didn't fully understand, and a predator who'd already perfected his pattern on previous victims. The harassing phone calls were clear warning signs. Kada knew something was wrong. She told her family. She told friends. But understanding the level of danger, Recognizing that the person calling repeatedly wasn't just annoying but lethal, that's a recognition that requires either experience with violence or the kind of paranoia that makes normal life impossible. Think about it from Kada's perspective. A guy sends a casual text, then calls a few times, then calls more. It's uncomfortable, unwanted, maybe creepy, but does it feel like a threat worthy of police intervention? Does it feel like something that justifies changing jobs, moving, hiding? Or does it just feel like an awkward situation that will resolve itself if you keep declining calls? This is where predators thrive, in the gray zone where discomfort hasn't yet crystallized into recognized danger, where victims hesitate to overreact because society has taught them their fear is probably irrational. Kada wasn't ignoring danger. She was trying to calibrate her response appropriately. And by the time she realized the true level of threat, it was too late. Friday evening. Kada spent time with friends, enjoying those precious hours before her night shift. They talked, laughed, made plans for future gatherings. Her friends would later remember her smile, her joy, her normalcy. There was no sense of doom, no premonition. Just Kada being Kada, kind, present, alive. Around 9 p.m., Kada arrived at the terrace at Chestnut Hill for her shift. Her co-workers noted her arrival, the usual greetings exchanged. Everything appeared normal. Another night shift beginning like countless others. But at approximately 9:45 p.m., just 45 minutes into her shift, Kada left work early. This was unusual enough for co-workers to note, but not alarming enough to stop her. She was 23, an adult, capable of making her own decisions. If she needed to leave, that was her choice. What co-workers didn't know was what had prompted that early departure. The text messages. The coordination, Keon King arranging to meet her. Between 9:25 p.m. and 10:12 p.m. on October 4th, King called Kada 12 times. 12 calls in 47 minutes. The pattern of someone who wouldn't be ignored, who demanded attention, whose persistence felt like pressure she had to relieve. Among those calls were text messages that would later chill investigators. One exchange stood out with horrifying irony. Kada, possibly trying to lighten the mood or diffuse tension with humor, texted, "Kidnap me again." King responded, "Better be up too." Prosecutors would later analyze these messages. Was Kada joking, referencing something King had said to her in earlier conversations, trying to turn his intensity into something playful? Or was there a darker context? Had King already referenced his January kidnapping in their prior interactions, normalizing violence as something to joke about? The again in Kada's message suggests she was referencing something. But what? Had King told her about his ex-girlfriend? Had he framed it as a misunderstanding, a crazy ex making accusations? Or was Kada simply using hyperbole about his persistent contacting, not realizing the word kidnap would become literal? We'll never know her intent. What we know is the outcome. At 9:45 p.m., Kada left the terrace at Chestnut Hill. She walked out into the October night to meet Keon King. Whether she expected a brief conversation, whether she hoped to finally establish boundaries, whether she believed meeting in person would make the harassment stop, her reasoning died with her. King was waiting in a stolen black Hyundai Accent, a vehicle he'd taken just one day earlier, on October 3rd. The stolen car was purposeful. It couldn't be traced to him. It was mobile isolation, a crime scene on wheels. The facility's security cameras captured Kada walking toward the parking area. Then nothing. The next confirmed fact is devastating. Kada's phone went offline at 10:24 p.m. In the 39 minutes between leaving work and her phone dying, Kada Scott was abducted, transported, and murdered. We must be careful here. The investigation revealed fact about Kada's murder, but some details remain unknown. What we know with certainty is that Kada was shot in the head. A single gunshot, execution style. Medical examiners determined this was a cause of death, and the wound pattern indicated close range. What we can infer from King's prior pattern and the evidence is a probable sequence. Kada met King at the stolen vehicle. Whether she got in willingly, believing it was just a conversation, or whether force was used immediately, she ended up inside that car. Once isolated in the vehicle, King had complete control. He was armed with an illegal firearm. He was larger and stronger. He had already crossed the line of threatening violence. And he'd done this before. His ex-girlfriend in January had been forced into a car just like this. At some point during or immediately after the abduction, King shot Kada in the head. The single shot suggests he intended to kill her, not merely threaten or assault. This wasn't passion or loss of control. This was execution. The phone going offline at 10:24 p.m. likely marked a moment of death, or shortly after, perhaps King removing the battery or destroying the phone to prevent tracking. Understanding motive in murders like this is crucial, not because it justifies anything, but because it helps us recognize similar situations before they turn fatal. King didn't kill Kada because of anything she did. She didn't reject him cruelly, didn't betray him, didn't provoke him. She died because she represented something to him, an object to be controlled, a woman who wasn't responding to his demands with sufficient fear and compliance, a target who had to be dominated completely. The January assault had ended with his victim alive because she complied, submitted, survived through obedience. But Kada didn't have that history with King. She didn't know the rules of engagement with a violent abuser. She may have tried to assert boundaries, to say no firmly, to end the interaction decisively, all reasonable responses that, with a predator like King, triggered lethal violence. Or perhaps King had already decided. Perhaps the harassment was never about getting Kada to comply. Perhaps it was about creating conditions for isolated access so he could kill. The stolen car the day before suggests premeditation. The text arranging the meeting suggests planning. The single shot suggests intent. Kada died because Keon King chose to kill her. That's the only motive that matters. Every other detail is context for his choice, not justification. What King did next reveals his psychology as clearly as the murder itself. He didn't panic. He didn't immediately flee. He didn't call 911 claiming an accident. He executed a plan. Cell phone data would later reveal King's movements after the murder. His phone pinged repeatedly at two locations, the Belmont Terrace address where Kada had worked, and the area around Ada H. Lewis Middle School. Back and forth. Multiple trips. The pattern of someone transporting a body, disposing of evidence, covering tracks. King took Kada's body to the Belmont Terrace location, possibly his residence or location he had access to. There, he held her body for days. Not hours. Days. While a family filed missing person reports. While police searched. While Kada's parents begged for information. Her body remained hidden, stored like evidence King wasn't sure how to dispose of. This wasn't the behavior of someone who'd lost control. This was calculation. This was a man who'd killed and was now solving the logistical problem of body disposal. For nearly 2 weeks, Kada's body remained hidden. During this time, her family reported her missing on October 5th, beginning a nightmare of uncertainty. Police launched a missing person investigation, searching areas including Aubrey Arboretum on October 14th based on tips that yielded nothing. King continued his normal life, moving between Delaware and Philadelphia, acting as though nothing had happened. Somewhere during this period, King recruited help. Whether willingly given or coerced through fear, at least one other person became involved in disposing of Kada's body. Surveillance video from the early morning of October 6 shows something chilling. 2 figures carrying a heavy object wrapped in material toward the wooded area behind Ada H. Lewis Middle School. The timestamp, 4 a.m. The location, isolated, dark, a former school building now abandoned. They dug a shallow grave. They buried Kada. They left evidence at the scene. Her phone case, her iPad case, her glasses, her ID card. Whether these items fell accidentally or were left intentionally as markers, they remained as silent witnesses to murder. King also disposed of the black Hyundai Accent, the mobile crime scene where Kada was likely shot. He burned it, charges later revealed. Arson to destroy evidence. Another calculated move showing clear understanding of forensics and criminal investigation. There's a question that haunts anyone who studies cases like Kada's. How does someone kill another human being, then go home and sleep? How do they carry a body and bury it and return to normal life? The answer isn't mysterious. It's terrifying in its simplicity. Keon King could do these things because Kada wasn't human to him. She was an object. Her death was a problem solved, not a life ended. His psychology didn't include empathy for his victims, remorse for his actions, or connection to the humanity he destroyed. Psychologists call this dehumanization, the cognitive process that allows normal moral restraints to be switched off. King didn't see Kada's smile that brightened rooms. He didn't think about her sister losing a role model or her parents losing their daughter. He didn't consider the nursing patient she'd never care for or the future she'd never live. He saw an object that had resisted his control and needed to be eliminated. And once eliminated, he saw a disposal problem requiring practical solutions. That's how he slept at night. That's how he functioned normally. Because in his psychology, he hadn't done anything wrong. He'd simply exercised a power he believed he had the right to possess. While King slept, Kada's family were drowning in terror and hope. Missing person cases are torture for families. The not knowing, the alternating between hope that their loved one will walk through the door and dread that the next phone call will confirm their worst fears. Kada's parents called everyone she knew. They posted on social media. They begged anyone with information to come forward. They searched neighborhoods. They filed police reports. They did everything families do when someone they love vanishes. And for 14 days, their daughter lay in a shallow grave behind the school, her body slowly being reclaimed by earth, her possessions scattered nearby, her murder unsolved simply because no one had looked in quite the right place. October 18th, 2025. Philadelphia police received a tip, anonymous, specific, insistent. Go back. She's there. Look again. Officers returned to the wooded area behind Ada H. Lewis Middle School in East Germantown. They'd searched these grounds before during the missing person investigation, but this time they searched differently, deeper, more thoroughly, and there, hidden in a shallow grave, they found her. Kada Scott's remains, her phone case nearby, her iPad case, her glasses, the same one she'd worn when she smiled for photos with friends, her ID card, everything that identified her in life, scattered around her in death. DNA testing confirmed what her family already knew in their hearts. Their daughter, their sister, their friend. She wasn't missing anymore. She was gone. Kada Scott was 23 years old. She had a whole nursing career ahead of her. Decades of patients she would have comforted, lives she would have touched, difference she would have made. She had a sister who looked up to her, parents who believed in her, friends who loved her genuine joy. She'll never help another elderly resident at the facility. Never graduate to full nurse status. Never meet someone who truly values her. Never have children. Never grow old. Never do anything again. All because a predator the system had caught and released decided she was his to take. Before we continue with how justice responded, I need you to pause and think. How many red flags must wave before we act? How many women must report harassment before we believe them? How many drop charges before we realize we're enabling murder? If you've ever wondered why we tell these stories, it's not for entertainment. It's because Kada Scott's death was preventable. The warning signs weren't hidden. They were documented, reported, even posted online. Drop a comment below if you believe the system failed Kada, because what happened next in the investigation shows just how much evidence had existed all along. The night after Kada vanished, her family knew something was catastrophically wrong. Kada was responsible, communicative, connected to her loved ones. When she didn't come home from her shift, when calls went to voicemail, when texts remained unread, alarm bells rang immediately. Her parents contacted Philadelphia police to report her missing. They provided her photo, her work information, the last known sighting at the terrace at Chestnut Hill. They mentioned the harassing phone call she'd reported. They did everything right, everything fast. But in a city where people go missing regularly, where resources are stretched thin, where adults have a right to disappear if they choose, the initial response was measured. Missing person cases require a delicate balance. Most adults who disappear reappear within 48 hours. They stayed with friend, needed space, had their phone die. Police can't launch full-scale investigations immediately for every adult who doesn't come home. But for families living the nightmare, every hour feels like complicity in whatever's happening to their loved one. Philadelphia Police Homicide Unit took lead on Kada's case as concerning details emerged. Her sudden departure from work, the phone going offline, the harassment reports, the lack of any activity on her phone, social media, or bank accounts. This wasn't someone who'd chosen to disappear. This was someone who'd been disappeared. Detectives began the painstaking work of reconstruction. Kada's phone records revealed the 12 calls from Keon King between 9:25 and 10:12 p.m. on October 4th. The text messages, including the haunting "Kidnap Me Again" exchange. The phone's last ping at 10:24 p.m. Co-workers of the terrace confirmed Kada had left early, around 9:45 p.m. They'd seen nothing unusual, heard nothing alarming. She'd simply left. Security footage showed Kada walking toward the parking area. Then nothing. The cameras didn't capture the abduction itself. King had likely parked just outside camera range, deliberately or by luck. As detectives investigated Keon King's background, they discovered the January assault case, the dropped charges, the victim too scared to testify, the pattern that screamed warning. By October 14th, detectives had constructed a timeline that pointed conclusively at Keon King. October 2nd, first text from King to Kada. Yo, Kada, this my new number. October 3rd, King stole the black Hyundai accent. Preparation for a crime requiring anonymous transportation. October 4th, 9:25 to 10:12 p.m. 12 calls and texts between King and Kada, including arrangements to meet. October 4th, 9:45 p.m. Kada left work early. October the 4th, 10:24 p.m. Kada's phone went offline, likely the moment of or immediately after her murder. October 4th to 6th, King's cell phone pinged repeatedly between Belmar Terrace, where he had access, and the area around Ada H. Lewis Middle School, where the body would be found. October 6th, 4 a.m. Surveillance video showed two figures carrying a heavy wrapped object toward the woods behind the school. October 6th to 18th, King's phone continued showing normal activity, moving between Philadelphia and Delaware. Cell phone data doesn't lie. It created a map of King's movements that investigators could trace. He'd been at the crime scene. He'd been at the disposal site. He'd been there repeatedly. And the timing aligned perfectly with Kada's disappearance. Acting on tips, police searched Aubrey Arboretum, a historic garden and wooded area in Philadelphia. They combed through the grounds looking for any sign of Kada. They found nothing. The search was exhaustive but fruitless, adding to the family's anguish. On October 15th, Keon King self-surrendered to Philadelphia police. The timing was significant. He turned himself in before Kada's body was discovered, but after investigators had clearly identified him as a suspect based on the phone records and his pattern of behavior. He was processed and charged initially with offenses related to the January assault case, which prosecutors were refiling. The kidnapping charge, false imprisonment, stalking, all the charges that had been dropped when his ex-girlfriend couldn't testify were back on the table. This time, with Kada missing and King clearly in investigators' sights, prosecutors weren't letting anything slide. King was initially held on $2.5 million bail, an amount that should have kept him locked up. But at this point, he hadn't yet been charged with Kada's murder. She was still officially a missing person, her body undiscovered. During their investigation, police had been searching areas connected to King. At Ada H. Lewis Middle School grounds, officers found items that stopped them cold. Kada's phone case, her iPad case, her glasses, her ID card. These weren't items that would accidentally be in that location. This was evidence of a crime. But without a body, without confirmation that Kada was dead rather than held somewhere, investigators couldn't yet charge murder. Someone knew. Someone had seen something, heard something, knew something they couldn't keep quiet any longer. The tip came in anonymous but specific. Go back to the school. She's there. Look again. Philadelphia police homicide detectives returned to Ada H. Lewis Middle School. This time, they searched beyond where the evidence had been found. They searched the wooded area more thoroughly. And there, in a shallow grave that had been missed in previous searches, they found Kada Scott's body. The discovery was both the answer the family had been dreading and the evidence prosecutors needed. Kada Scott's disappearance was officially a homicide, and Keon King, already in custody, was about to face murder charges. Medical examiners from Philadelphia's Office of the Medical Examiner conducted the autopsy. Their findings were conclusive. The cause of death was gunshot wound to the head. Single shot, close range, immediately or rapidly fatal. Her manner of death, homicide. No possibility of accident or suicide. This was murder. The time of death was estimated based on decomposition to have occurred on or around October 4th, consistent with when Kada disappeared. Remains were positively identified as Kada Scott through DNA comparison with family samples. The forensic evidence told a clear story. Kada had been shot execution style, likely in or near the stolen vehicle. within the time frame when her phone went offline. She'd been dead for approximately 14 days when discovered, her body held for days before burial in the shallow grave. If cell phone data created a map of King's movements, the content of his communications with Kada provided motive and intent. The "kidnap me again" text exchange showed King had likely referenced his pattern of violence to Kada, normalizing kidnapping as something to joke about. Whether Kada understood the reference or not, it demonstrated King's mindset. Kidnapping was part of his identity, something he talked about casually. The 12 calls in 47 minutes showed obsessive pursuit, someone who wouldn't be ignored or told no. The timing of the phone going offline exactly aligned with when King's cell phone was in the same location as Kada's last ping, proving he was with her when her phone died, when she likely died. The October 6 surveillance footage became crucial evidence. Enhanced and analyzed frame by frame, it showed two individuals carrying what investigators determined was a body wrapped in material. The timestamp, 4 a.m., the time when criminal activity happens under cover of darkness. The location, directly toward where Kada's body would be discovered weeks later. While the video quality didn't allow for definitive facial identification, the size, build, and movements matched Keon King, and the presence of a second individual confirmed what prosecutors suspected. King had helped disposing of the body. The stolen black Hyundai Accent told its own story. King's theft of the vehicle on October 3rd, one day before Kada's murder, showed premeditation. This wasn't an opportunistic crime. This was planned. When King burned the vehicle, charged later as arson, he destroyed the primary crime scene. But burning a car doesn't completely eliminate evidence. Even destroyed, the fact of the theft, the timing, and the disposal through fire demonstrated consciousness of guilt and effort to conceal evidence. 5 days after discovering Kada's body, prosecutors filed murder charges against Keon King. The charges were comprehensive. First-degree murder, intentional killing with premeditation, the stolen car, the planned meeting, the execution-style shot. Kidnapping, forcibly abducting Kada from the facility. Abuse of corpse, improper disposal of human remains. Arson, burning the stolen vehicle to destroy evidence. Weapons violations, illegal possession of firearms under Pennsylvania's Uniform Firearms Act. Additional charges related to the January assault case, now refiled with renewed prosecutorial commitment. King's bail was revoked. He was held without possibility of release pending trial. And Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner's office, led by Assistant District Attorney Ashley Toxilowski, began building the case that would ensure Keon King never walked free again. The surveillance video showing a second person helping dispose of Kada's body launched a separate investigation. Who helped King? Why? Were they coerced through fear, or were they willing participants? As of the last public updates, this investigation remained ongoing. The identity of the accomplice had not been publicly released, but prosecutors made clear everyone involved in Kada's murder, death, or cover-up will be held accountable. One Mystery lingered, who called in the tip on October 18th directing police back to the school. Was it the accomplice, unable to live with what they participated in? Was it someone King had told, someone who initially kept silent but whose conscience finally broke? Was it a witness who'd seen something suspicious but took time to connect it to Kada's disappearance? The tip was anonymous, and investigators protected that anonymity. But that phone call, those specific directions, saved Kada's family from potentially months or years of not knowing. It brought closure, though closure in this context means confirming your worst fears. As news of Kada's murder spread through Philadelphia, the community's grief turned to rage. How had this happened? How had a man with King's documented pattern of violence been free to kill? Where were the system failures, and who would be held accountable? More than 100 people gathered for a vigil honoring Kada Scott. Friends, family, community members who'd never met her but were united in grief and anger. Candles were lit. Stories were shared. Kada's family stood before the crowd, their pain visible, their strength remarkable. Kada's parents released a statement through the district attorney's office. We are profoundly thankful for the outpouring of support from our community and ask that you keep our family in your prayers as we navigate this unimaginable loss. Their words were measured, gracious even in anguish. But underlying them was a question that would dominate discussions of Kada's case. Could she have been saved? Kada's murder sparked intense scrutiny of Philadelphia's criminal justice system. Why were the January charges dropped? District Attorney Larry Krasner's office faced criticism for not finding ways to prosecute the case without the victim's testimony, or for not providing sufficient protection to encourage testimony. Why wasn't King monitored more closely after the charges? Once identified as a violent offender, even with dropped charges, shouldn't he have been on law enforcement's radar when Kada was reported missing? Could social media evidence have been used differently? King's own videos showed him committing crimes. Why couldn't those videos support prosecution without victim testimony? What about the multiple harassment reports? Several women had reported King. Was there a failure to recognize a pattern emerging across separate reports? These weren't rhetorical questions. They were urgent inquiries into how systems designed to protect people had failed Kada Scott so catastrophically. By late October 2025, investigators had built an overwhelming case against Keon King. The evidence wasn't circumstantial, it was definitive. Digital evidence placing him with Kada at the time of her death, cell phone data tracking his movements to disposal sites, video evidence of body disposal, his own posted videos establishing pattern, forensic evidence from the crime scene, prior documented violence showing escalation, witness testimony from co-workers and family, medical examiner's determination of homicide. The investigation was thorough, professional, and damning. When King's case went to court, prosecutors would have every piece of evidence needed to ensure conviction. But evidence and justice aren't the same thing. Because no conviction, no sentence, no punishment could return Kada to her family. Investigation had answered how and who and when. It could never answer why society had allowed it to happen. When Keon King appeared for his arraignment on murder charges, he stood before Judge Lucretia Clements at Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas. The charges read aloud painted a picture of calculated violence, first-degree murder, kidnapping, abuse of corpse, arson, weapons violations. King's demeanor was stoic. No visible emotion, no tears, no remorse showing on his face. He stood as the charges were read, as the evidence was summarized, as Kada's family sat in the courtroom gallery watching the man who destroyed their world. His plea, not guilty. The court's decision on bail, none. King would remain incarcerated without possibility of release pending trial. Given the severity of charges, the strength of evidence, and his prior pattern of violence, he was deemed a danger to the community and a flight risk. Representing Keon King was Shaka Johnson, a high-profile criminal defense attorney known for taking difficult cases. Johnson's representation immediately sparked controversy within Philadelphia's community. As details of Kada's murder emerged, the premeditation, the pattern, the preventable nature of the tragedy, public anger focused not just on King but on anyone seen as enabling or defending him. A petition demanding Johnson withdraw from the case gathered over 2,000 signatures. The petition argued that defending someone with King's documented pattern of violence against women was morally unconscionable. Johnson's response was firm and public. He would not withdraw. In statements to media, he emphasized, "Not for money or notoriety. Every defendant deserves representation." This is legally and ethically correct. The right to counsel is foundational to the justice system. But emotionally, for a community grieving Kada and angry at systemic failures, watching Johnson defend King felt like another betrayal. Leading the prosecution was Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner's office, specifically Assistant District Attorney Ashley Toxilowski. Toxilowski, experienced in violent crime prosecution, took personal ownership of ensuring justice for Kada. In public statements, Toxilowski characterized King's crimes clearly: pattern of behavior. Two words that encapsulated the prosecution strategy show the jury that Kada's murder wasn't an isolated incident, but the inevitable outcome of a predator allowed to operate unchecked. The preliminary hearings establishing whether sufficient evidence existed to proceed to trial. These hearings, while not the full trial, offered the first public glimpse of the evidence prosecutors had compiled. Evidence presented at preliminary hearings. Complete phone record showing the 12 calls between King and Kada on October 4th. Text message transcripts, including the haunting "kidnap me again" exchange. Cell phone location data creating a map of King's movements before, during, and after the murder. Timeline showing King's phone pinging at Belmar Terrace and the school grounds repeatedly. Surveillance footage from the terrace at Chestnut Hill showing Kada leaving at 9:45 p.m. October 6 surveillance showing two figures carrying a wrapped object toward the woods at 4 a.m. King's own TikTok and Instagram videos from January showing him targeting his ex-girlfriend. The courtroom fell silent when prosecutors presented the text message exchange, projected on screens for the judge, defense, and gallery to see. Kada Scott, kidnap me again, Keon King. Better be up too, because those words, likely intended as flirtatious banter or anxious humor, had been Kada's last normal communication before her death. The irony was excruciating. Kada had written the word kidnap, perhaps joking, perhaps referencing something King had said to make himself seem roguish rather than dangerous. And then he had kidnapped her and murdered her. Miss Scott had no idea these would be among her last words. She had no idea the man she was texting had already kidnapped and strangled another woman just 9 months earlier. She had no idea he'd stolen a car the day before specifically to commit this crime. She was 23 years old, trying to navigate an uncomfortable situation, and she trusted that kidnap was just a word. Keon King showed her it wasn't. One of the most critical elements of the prosecution's case was establishing King's pattern through the January 2025 assault. Pennsylvania law allows pattern evidence in certain circumstances, and prosecutors argued successfully that the prior kidnapping and strangulation were directly relevant to understanding Kada's murder. It established that King had a specific method: target young women, force them into vehicles, commit violence in isolation. The method he'd used on his ex-girlfriend was identical to what happened to Kada, except this time, King had ensured there would be no victim alive to testify. Shaka Johnson, representing King, faced an unenviable task: defending the indefensible. With overwhelming evidence, documented pattern, and victim testimony, traditional defenses, King wasn't there, someone else did it, it was an accident, were non-starters. Johnson's emerging strategy appeared focused on 2 angles. 1. Challenging the strength of evidence, questioning the reliability of cell phone location data, arguing the surveillance video didn't definitively show King, suggesting alternative explanation for the evidence. 2. Potential mental health defense, laying groundwork for possible diminished capacity arguments, suggesting King's actions, while criminal, might not meet the legal standard for first-degree murder requiring premeditation, potentially arguing for lesser charges. However, preliminary hearings revealed the challenges in these defenses. The evidence was overwhelming. The premeditation was documented. Stolen car day before, arranged meeting through texts. King's own video showed him capable of planning and executing crimes. Throughout preliminary hearings, King maintained an emotionless facade. Court observers noted: appearance, dressed in prison-issued clothing, well-groomed, physically present but emotionally absent. During evidence presentation, no visible reaction to photos of Kada, crime scene evidence, or the burial site. When his text messages were displayed, he showed no emotion, no shame, no regret, nothing. During ex-girlfriend's testimony, did not look at her, stared straight ahead, jaw set, giving nothing away. His lack of reaction was itself revealing. Either he felt nothing, or he was performing indifference. Body language: sat still, occasionally whispered to his attorney, but showed none of the nervous fidgeting, emotional breaks, or visible distress that even guilty defendants often display when confronting evidence of their crimes. Eye contact: never looked toward Kada's family seated in the gallery. Whether this was strategic on advice of counsel or natural inability to face what he'd done, the effect was the same. He appeared cold, detached, inhuman. Forensic psychologists who study defendant behavior note that King's stoicism could indicate several things: genuine lack of remorse. Psychopathic traits include inability to feel guilt or empathy. King may literally feel nothing about Kada's death beyond inconvenience at being caught. Performance for jury: defendants are sometimes coached to show no emotion, as emotional displays can seem manipulative. King may be following counsel's advice. Dissociation: some defendants psychologically separate from their crimes, unable to connect courtroom proceedings with actions they know intellectually they committed. Whatever the psychological mechanism, the effect on Kada's family was agonizing. They sat watching the man who'd murdered their daughter show less emotion than someone receiving a parking ticket. While full victim impact statements typically come at sentencing, Kada's family was present throughout preliminary hearings. Their presence was itself testimony, silent, grief-stricken, demanding acknowledgement of what had been taken from them. Kada's mother, father, and sister attended every hearing. They dressed formally, sat with dignity despite visible pain, and represented Kada's memory with grace that stood in stark contrast to King's emptiness. After one particularly difficult session where autopsy photos were presented, Kada's father released a brief statement to media. Kada was not a crime scene photo. She was our daughter, our joy, and he took her from us like she was nothing. That statement, like she was nothing, captured the essence of the family's anguish. King had treated Kada as disposable. The justice system's job was to prove she was irreplaceable. At the conclusion of preliminary hearings, Judge Lucretia Clements ruled that prosecutors had established probable cause on all charges. The case would proceed to trial. Her statement from the bench was measured but clear. The evidence presented establishes that Miss Scott met her death through violence, that Mr. King had means and opportunity, and that a pattern of behavior suggests motive and intent. This case will be heard by a jury of Mr. King's peers, and they will determine his guilt or innocence. But make no mistake, the evidence is substantial. The trial was scheduled for 2026, allowing both sides time to prepare. For Kada's family, this meant months more of waiting, of reliving the trauma, of seeing King's face in courtroom proceedings. For prosecutors, it meant building an airtight case that would result in conviction on first-degree murder, the charge carrying Pennsylvania's maximum penalties. For King, it meant remaining in Curran-Fromhold Correctional Facility, held without bail, waiting to face a jury that would determine whether he spent the rest of his life in prison. Outside the courtroom, public opinion was unanimous and fierce. Social media erupted with demand for justice. Hashtags like #JusticeForKada trended locally. Kada's story was featured on true crime podcasts and SCOT TV specials. But beyond the public attention, something more meaningful emerged: conversations about systemic failures. Kada's case became a catalyst for discussing how dropped charges in domestic violence cases enable escalation to homicide, the need for better victim protection and support, the role of social media evidence in prosecution, pattern recognition across separate incident reports, Philadelphia DA policies and their real-world consequences. These conversations were uncomfortable, necessary, and, for Kada's family, bittersweet. Their daughter's death was sparking change. But no change, no policy reform, no systemic improvement would bring her back. Before we move forward, ask yourself, do you think the system failed Kada? Or was this evil inevitable? Was there a moment when intervention could have saved her? Or was Keon King's pattern always going to end in murder? Hit that like button if you believe justice demands accountability not just for killers but for the systems that enable them. Subscribe to Crazy Crime News for more stories that expose these failures. And drop a comment with your answer. Could Kada have been saved? As of late 2025, Keon King remains incarcerated at Curran-Fromhold Correctional Facility in Philadelphia, awaiting trial. His life is narrowed to a cell, a cot, routine meals, and the knowledge that he will likely never walk free again. But his physical incarceration is nothing compared to the life sentences imposed on Kada Scott's family and community. From his incarceration, King has shown no signs of remorse, reflection, or recognition of the magnitude of what is done. There have been no tearful jailhouse interviews expressing regret, no letters of apology to Kada's family, no religious awakening or philosophical transformation. His attorney, Shaka Johnson, continues to mount a vigorous defense, as is Johnson's ethical obligation. In media statements, Johnson has maintained that King deserves his day in court and that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. These statements, while legally accurate, ring hollow against the weight of evidence and the depth of Kada's family's grief. Prison records indicate King has had no significant disciplinary incidents since incarceration. He follows facility rules, keeps to himself, participates in no programming. He exists in a kind of emotional stasis, neither violently acting out nor showing growth or change. This lack of remorse isn't surprising given King's pattern. Predators like him don't see their victims as fully human. Kada's death likely registers for him not as a moral catastrophe but as a tactical error. He got caught. The problem isn't that he murdered. The problem is that he'll be punished for it. While King sits in prison, investigators continue seeking the second person seen on surveillance video helping dispose of Kada's body. That individual remains unidentified publicly, though prosecutors have made clear that charges will be filed once the accomplice is conclusively identified. The accomplice's role raises troubling questions. Were they coerced? Did King threaten them into helping, using the same intimidation tactics he'd used on victims? Were they willing? Did they participate knowing what they were doing, helping bury a murder victim, and choose to do it anyway? What did they know? Were they present for the murder itself, or did they only become involved afterward when King needed help with disposal? Will they come forward? As time passes and guilt accumulates, will this person eventually confess or cooperate with prosecutors? The surveillance video is haunting not just for what it shows, two figures carrying Kada's body, but for what it represents. At least one other human being knew Kada was dead, knew she was being hidden, knew her family was searching desperately, and said nothing for weeks. That silence, that complicity, is its own form of evil. For Kada Scott's parents and sister, life after October 18, 2025, is divided into before and after. Before Kada's murder, they were a family with normal concerns: work, school, upcoming holidays, future plans. After, they are a family defined by absence. Kada's funeral was attended by hundreds: friends from Penn State, co-workers from the terrace, family members, community members who never met her but were united in grief. The service celebrated her life, her joy, her ambition, her kindness, while acknowledging the violence of her death. Her parents faced the impossible task of planning a funeral for a daughter who should have been planning her career. Her sister, still in high school, had to return to classes and normality while processing grief that no teenager should bear. Beyond emotional devastation, murder creates financial catastrophe for families. Funeral costs, lost income from bereavement leave, potential relocation if the family home becomes unbearable with memories. The practical costs of violent death compound the emotional ones. A GoFundMe campaign was established to support Kada's family and to raise awareness about violence against women. The community responded generously, but no amount of money can compensate for what was taken. Kada's family now lives in a world full of triggers, reminders of what they've lost. The terrace at Chestnut Hill, where Kada worked and was last seen alive. Ada H. Lewis Middle School, where her body was found. News coverage that repeatedly shows her photo. Court dates that require reliving the horror. Holidays without her. Her birthday as an annual memorial rather than celebration. Her sister's high school graduation, an event Kada should have attended. Kada's younger sister faces unique trauma. She's lost not just a family member, but a role model, a protector, a guide through the transition to adulthood. She's watching her parents grieve while trying to process her own loss. And she's doing it all while trying to maintain focus on school, on her own college plans, on building a future in a world that suddenly feels dangerous and unfair. Kada had been proof that dreams could come true. She'd gone to Penn State, graduated, started her nursing career. For her sister, that proof has been replaced with fear. If it could happen to Kada, it could happen to anyone. Parents aren't supposed to bury their children. The natural order is violated when a 23-year-old daughter is murdered. Kada's parents now face decades of life without her. No wedding to plan, no grandchildren to meet, no phone calls updating them on her life. Their grief is compounded by the preventability of her death. King had been caught, charged. The system had him, and then let him go. For Kada's parents, every court appearance is a reminder not just that their daughter was murdered, but that she might still be alive if anyone had listened, acted, believed, protected. Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner, known for progressive criminal justice reforms, faced intense criticism over the dropped January charges. Critics argue that Krasner's policies, including reluctance to pursue cases without victim cooperation, had directly enabled King to murder Kada. Supporters of Krasner countered that victim-centered prosecution is essential, that forcing traumatized victims to testify can be re-traumatizing, and that the system failure was more complex than one officer's policies. But for Kada's family and many community members, the criticism felt justified. A violent predator had been caught, charged, and released. 9 months later, he murdered. The causal chain seemed undeniable. Mark Giragos, renowned criminal defense attorney with decades of experience in high-profile cases, provided analysis for true crime media coverage. His assessment was chilling in its simplicity. There are certain people in society who are predatory and will prey on innocent people. Giragos' point was that some individuals, through combination of psychology, trauma, choices, and circumstances, become predators. They don't see other humans as possessing equal value and rights. They see targets, objects, opportunities. Pennsylvania legislators began discussing bills that would mandate GPS monitoring for defendants in domestic violence cases awaiting trial, create strangulation registries similar to sex offender registries, increase funding for victim services and protection, allow for evidence-based prosecution in domestic violence cases. Questions were raised about TikTok and Instagram's responsibility when users post evidence of crimes. Should platforms be required to report criminal content to law enforcement? Should they remove such content faster? The debate continues. Despite these conversations, fundamental problems remain. Victim fear still prevents prosecution. No policy change eliminates the terror victims feel when contemplating testifying against violent abusers. Illegal weapons remain accessible. Philadelphia's gun violence continues, with illegal firearms readily available despite laws prohibiting certain individuals from possessing them. Resource limitations persist. Understaffed police departments, overwhelmed prosecutors, underfunded victim services. The resource crisis that contributed to Kada's death continues. Perpetrator's current status. Keon King remains in current Fromhold Correctional Facility. His daily life is regulated, controlled, limited, ironic given his obsession with controlling others. Pennsylvania has the death penalty but rarely uses it. The last execution was in 1999. D.A. Krasner opposes capital punishment and hasn't sought it in any case. King will not face death penalty, instead likely receiving life without parole if convicted of first-degree murder. For some community members, this is justice. For others, it feels inadequate. King will live decades in prison, reading, eating, breathing, while Kada lies in a grave. The second person seen on surveillance video carrying Kada's body has not been publicly charged as of late 2025. This person is living their life, going to work, seeing family, sleeping in their own bed, while knowing they helped bury a murder victim. Their silence continues to wound Kada's family. Someone out there knows details about Kada's final moments, about where her body was held, about King's state of mind. Someone could provide answers that might bring small comfort. But that someone remains silent, free, complicit. As King sits in prison awaiting trial, as prosecutors build their case, as defense attorneys prepare counter-arguments, the machinery of justice grinds forward. But for Kada's family, justice feels like the wrong word. Justice would have been King remaining imprisoned after January. Justice would have been the system believing his ex-girlfriend's fear was evidence enough. Justice would have been Kada receiving her harassing calls and having police take immediate protective action. What's coming isn't justice. It's accountability. It's punishment. It's society's attempt to respond to horror after the fact. But it's not justice, because justice would have prevented Kada's murder in the first place. Her parents said it perfectly. The worst thing we could have hoped for happened. Even conviction, even life in prison for King. It's the worst outcome because it means their daughter is gone. True justice would be Kada alive. So what do we take from this? What's the lesson buried beneath the horror of Kada Scott's murder? Because if her death means nothing, if we learn nothing, if nothing changes, then King has taken not just her life but also the meaning that could come from her story. When a victim is too terrified to testify, when harassment escalates despite restraining orders, when someone tells you they're afraid, believe them. Fear isn't weakness. Fear is information. Fear is evidence of danger. Keon King's ex-girlfriend was too scared to appear in court in January 2025. Prosecutors characterized her simply as too scared. The system interpreted this fear as a case that couldn't proceed, a practical obstacle to prosecution. But her fear was actually the strongest evidence of King's dangerousness. She wasn't scared because she was weak or unreliable. She was scared because King had shown her he was capable of killing her, his hands around her throat, cutting off her air, demonstrating that power. She looked into his eyes and seen someone who could and would end her life if given the chance. Kada Scott reported harassing phone calls to her family. She told them someone was bothering her persistently. Her discomfort was noted but not escalated to the level of protective intervention. The calls were annoying, uncomfortable, but did they warrant police involvement, workplace security changes, restraining orders? The fear wasn't quantified as sufficient danger, but the fear was proportional to the threat. Both women were correctly calibrating danger. Both were trying to communicate, "I'm not safe," in ways that wouldn't sound hysterical or paranoid. Both were ignored until it was too late. We live in a society that questions victims' fear. We ask, "Are you sure you're not overreacting? Is it really that bad? Do you have concrete evidence he'll hurt you?" We require victims to provide proof of future violence, an impossible standard. But fear is biological danger detection. When someone tells you they're afraid, especially when that fear relates to a specific person with a history of violence, believe them. Err on the side of protection. Overreaction that prevents murder is better than underreaction that enables it. Victim fear should trigger enhanced protection measures, not case dismissal. If someone is too scared to testify, that fact alone should qualify them for witness protection. Secured housing, GPS monitoring of the abuser, and aggressive evidence-based prosecution that doesn't rely on victim testimony. When a friend tells you they're afraid of someone, believe them immediately. Don't minimize. Don't suggest they're overreacting. Help them create safety plans, document harassment, report to authorities, and leave safely if possible. Normalize taking fears seriously. Create cultures where reporting danger is praised, not mocked. Where concern for safety is reasonable, not paranoid. Kada's fear was real. Her family knew she was uncomfortable, but the fear wasn't translated into protection, and she died. When we catch violent offenders and then release them due to drop charges, we're not giving them a second chance. We're giving them permission. We're teaching them that violence works, fear silences victims, and the system won't stop them. January 2025, Keon King was arrested and charged with kidnapping, assault, and strangulation. These are serious felonies. The evidence was substantial. Video he posted himself, victim's immediate report, medical documentation of injuries, pattern of behavior. The charges were dropped when his victim was too scared to testify. From the system's perspective, this was unfortunate but necessary. Without victim testimony, the case couldn't proceed. But from King's perspective, he learned critical lessons. Strangulation works. It terrifies victims into silence. The justice system requires victim cooperation. He can prevent through fear. If you make victims scared enough, they won't testify. Social media videos of crimes don't lead to conviction without victim testimony. You can kidnap, assault, and strangle someone and walk free within months. Every lesson made Kada's murder more likely. The drop charges weren't mercy. They were a training program for homicide. October 2025. King murdered Kada Scott using the exact same method he perfected in January. Force a woman into a vehicle, commit violence in isolation. But this time, he learned from the January mistake of leaving a witness. This time, he ensured his victim couldn't testify. When violent offenders face no consequences, violence escalates. Domestic abusers don't interpret drop charges as forgiveness or second chance. They interpret them as confirmation that violence is effective and they are untouchable. Research on domestic violence lethality shows that strangulation is the single strongest predictor of future homicide, increasing risk by 750%. When someone crosses a line to strangulation, they are demonstrating both willingness and ability to kill. Releasing them without consequences isn't rehabilitation, it's enabling murder. King's escalation from non-fatal strangulation to fatal shooting followed a predictable pattern. Experts could have forecast his likelihood of killing. The January assault should have triggered high-risk intervention. Instead, it resulted in his release. If the January victim had felt safe enough to testify, if the system had protected her sufficiently, Kada might live. If witnesses to King's harassment of multiple women had all reported, and those reports had been aggregated, he might have been stopped. If the accomplice had come forward immediately, Kada's family could have been spared days of agonizing uncertainty. Silence is understandable, but silence kills. Kada Scott was 23 years old. She graduated from Penn State with dreams of a nursing career spanning decades. She had a smile described as contagious, a joy that brightened rooms, a family that loved her desperately. She'll never comfort another patient, never celebrate another birthday, never attend her sister's graduation, never meet someone who deserves her, never have children, never grow old, never do anything again. Her potential, immeasurable and now unrealized, is gone. 2 families destroyed, Kada's, who lost their daughter, sister, and joy, and King's own family, who must now live with what their relative became and the horror he inflicted. The January victim living with survivor's guilt, knowing her fear prevented prosecution that might have saved Kada. Other women King harassed, living with fear and what ifs. Kada's friends, robbed of a presence in their lives forever. The community, grappling with failure and fear. All because Keon King chose violence over respect, chose murder over letting go, chose to take a life he had no right to touch. Could better systems, earlier intervention, aggressive prosecution, adequate victim protection, serious pattern recognition, and community courage have saved Kada Scott? Yes. The answer is yes. Not maybe, not possibly. Yes. Her murder was preventable. The warning signs were clear. The pattern was documented. The system had opportunities to intervene. And it failed. Kada can't answer what we should do differently. But we can, and we must. If her death doesn't lead to change, if the same system failures continue, if victims remain unprotected, if charges keep getting dropped, if fear continues to silence, then more Kadas will die. Their names will be different. Their faces will be different. But their stories will be tragically similar. We owe Kada more than grief. We owe her change. If this story reminded you why we must believe victims before they become statistics, why harassment isn't harmless, why dropped charges aren't mercy but enablement, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Crazy Crime News for more stories that expose the truths we need to face, the cases that demand we pay attention, that we learn, that we change. Because we don't tell these stories for entertainment. We tell them because every detail, every warning sign, every system failure is a lesson that could save the next potential victim. And comment below with your answer to this question. If someone you love reports harassment or fear of an ex-partner, what will you do differently after hearing Kada's story? Will you minimize their concern, or will you help them get protection? Will you wait for concrete evidence of danger, or will you believe their fear is evidence enough? Have you seen warning signs in relationships around you? Do you know how to help someone escape domestic violence? What single change to the justice system do you think could have saved Kada? I want to hear your perspective, because this conversation, this uncomfortable, necessary, life-saving conversation, matters more than any single criminal case. This is Crazy Crime News, where we tell the stories that must be told. Kada Scott deserved so much more than 23 years. She deserved to care for patients for decades. She deserved to watch her sister graduate college. She deserved to make her parents proud. She deserved to be safe, to live in a world where persistent texts don't lead to graves, where reporting fear leads to protection, where the system catches predators and actually stops them. But Kada didn't get safety. She got Keon King. She got dropped charges that enabled escalation. She got a system that documented warning signs but failed to act on them. She got a shallow grave behind a school, her dreams buried with her body. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay aware, and never forget that Kada Scott was not just a victim. She was a daughter who called her parents regularly, a sister who inspired college dreams, a nurse who wanted to comfort people in pain, a friend whose smile was genuinely contagious, a young woman who should have had 60 more years of life. Kada Scott mattered. Her story matters. And if we learn nothing from it, if we change nothing, then we failed her twice. Say her name, Kada Scott. Remember her face. Remember her joy. Remember that she was real, she was loved, and she was failed by systems designed to protect her.